Hello and welcome to the online book group. This is January's book and we're discussing The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, well-known writer, Booker Prize winner. I think he did win the Booker for this particular book, in fact. Just a quick introduction. We're joined today by Col and Tahera. So I'll give a sort of very brief thumbnail summary. It's set in 1956, and it's a sort of Downton Abbey without the Crawleys scenario, because this big country house has been sold by the Darlington Hall. It's been sold by the Darlington family to a wealthy American, and there's basically just the butler left and a few odd members of staff. It's a very short staffed, and the butler's sort of overdoing it. So the sort of wealthy American has sort of said, why don't you take a week off, because I've got to go back to the States. You can borrow the car. And this is quite reluctant to do this because he's very sort of proper and formal. But he'd had a letter from the former housekeeper, Miss Kenton, and got the impression from her that she'd like to come back. So he decides to drive down to Devon to see her, to have a chat about it. And the whole book is based around this road trip, but a lot of it's reflective, and there's a lot of sort of flashbacks to what happened previously, and that's how it's all narrated by Stevens, and that's how the story develops. Let's just go around and sort of get some first impressions. Col, what was your first impression of the book?
My first impression is I genuinely believe that this is the closest to perfection I've ever come across in a novel. It's absolutely superb. Couldn't put it down. And this is going to sound silly, but when I realized I was getting towards the end of the book, I actually slowed down the pace I was reading it because I just did not want it to end. I think it's absolutely flawless, brilliant.
Lovely. Okay, Anne, how about you?
Well, I'd read it before, quite a long time ago, and I knew I'd enjoyed it, and so I was happy to read it again. And obviously I didn't remember all the details, but I mean, I agree with Col. It's an absolutely brilliant book, and I loved it. Yes, yeah. It is sad when you get into the end.
Yeah. How about you, Tahera? What was your first impression?
Oh my goodness. So I've been taken a journey back to a place I've obviously visited before, because this started off as just a book and reading it. And then in between, probably the middle, I then realized that it connected to some kind of emotion. I've seen this before, I've heard this before, I can see the language, and it's ever so weird. I started mirroring images of things and these feelings I got, and I just couldn't quite get what's making me feel like this. And then I realized it was a film with Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson.
Yes.
And the fact that I couldn't name the film, the fact that those things that drew me back, and then it was honestly like a revelation. So I ended up watching the film again. But the film's completely different to the book. But it was just the way that the whole thing, and then it took me back to, it made me emotional again, reading the book, watching the film, and I just cannot describe how it made me. Honestly, it's just beauty, and my two favorite actors and actresses. I love Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson, but that chemistry, purity of it, that love, that purity of that kind of love, but wanting to severely box the ears of the butler. Like, you silly old fool. You silly old fool.
Well, we'll get onto that aspect of it in a bit, but that's lovely, and I'm really pleased you all enjoyed it. I did too. I thought I'd read it ages ago, like Anne, but honestly, when I came to read it, I couldn't remember it, and it was an iPlayer, so I did watch the film as well, and I agree it's very different to the book. So let's just talk a little bit about the main character, Stevens. very sort of rigid and formal and proper. Let's just get your sort of views on how cleverly that character was portrayed and how he developed the sort of plot through the character, and what you thought about Stevens. Obviously, we had a bit of a hint from Tahera there. What you thought about the main character Stevens. How about you then, Col?
Well, I didn't think he was stupid. It's a bit harsh, but yeah, I mean, I think the key to understanding Stevens is his ambition, and his ambition is to be a truly great butler. And to do this, one has to have dignity in keeping with his position. And I've written this down. It says the great butlers are great by virtue of their ability to inhabit their professional role to the utmost. They won't be shaken out of it by external events, however surprising, alarming, or vexing. He will discard his professionalism only when he is entirely alone. And I think that's the key to understanding the character. And this explains why he finds it impossible to express his love for Miss Kenton, and why he can't engage in banter with Mr. Faraday, the American employer. And even it explains why he feels as though he can't abandon his post and go and see his father, even though he knows his father is dying. It's because the gentleman might withdraw to the living room or drawing room at any moment, and he must be available to serve port. And he reminds me of the android in Aliens, the movie, called Ash, where he looks like a human. To all intents and purposes, he is a human, but he's got his mission in life, and nothing will distract him from this end.
That's a really interesting observation, Col. In fact, I don't know if you've read Ishiguro's latest novel, which was shortlisted for the Booker, Clara and the Sun. That is about an android. And it's really interesting that you should mention that, because this is what Ishiguro seems to do. He sort of gets right deep into characters who aren't quite normal. And this is literally an android trying to relate to humans, and the difficulties that brings about and the problems that arise from it. So I love the way you've sort of made that link, and I think it's a really astute observation, because Stevens is not able to be emotionally and behaviorally a normal human being, is he? He's so constrained by the properness of his role.
Yeah, and it's purely through his ambition to be a perfect butler, just like his father used to be.
Yes.
In his time. I think it's very tragic. I think it's really sad.
It is. How about you, Anne? What was your take on Stevens?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. What's been said, you've got to get into his mindset, otherwise he's just annoying, because of the way he behaves. I think at the very end, I just re-looked. I finished it a while ago, just before the session. I re-looked at the end bit, and it's really very sad, because he's struggling with the fact that actually he hasn't really achieved what he wanted, and so kind of and then he meets this guy who says, "Don't look back, just carry, just go forward." So yeah, I mean, he's looked at by kind of normal, in quotes, standards of how people behave. He's just weird. Why do you possibly behave like that? But it's you've got to be in the butler mindset, and in the particular things. I think it's also related, isn't it, to the particular things that went on. I'm sure we're going to talk about that in a minute, about the things that went on with Lord Darlington in the house. I think that they affected him perhaps in ways that are not mentioned explicitly, but clearly they did. And that's part of it.
Overriding all of that was his loyalty to Lord Darlington, wasn't it? And that his service is his raison d'etre, isn't it? And that's what dictates everything in his life. How about you, Tahera? What I know, obviously you weren't too enthusiastic about him, but
no, I mean, watching the film is completely different than reading the book. I think, you know, looking at Anthony Hopkins is completely different as reading someone and this imagining this character. I think I felt sad for him towards the end, but it did frustrate me. However, I just felt like, I mean, I've written a paragraph on him. He's stuck in his own world, does not know how to connect with his own feelings, emotion. I felt there was a kind of military sense of duty, and that was fitting to the era that it was written in, and his job title. There was a lot of heavy reliance on order, and being like sort of the master of the house. Even with Lord Darlington, he looks on him like a godlike creature, you know, the person who is the fountain of all knowledge, etc. And he trusted him, but I felt that although he believed that he was doing the right things and saying the right things, towards the end there was that slight of swaying towards possibly he didn't do the right things, Lord Darlington, in the end. So he had that little bit of doubt in his head, and he tried to start accepting it. But I feel that he did feel that he was part of a bigger picture. So although he was quite selfish and driven in terms of his career and where he needed to be, I did feel though that he was thinking about the greater society in these matters, in the role that he played.
Lovely. Yeah, that's some really nice observations there, Tahera. Thank you for that. I want to just talk a little bit about the actual road trip now before we go on to the other aspects of this book, because in some ways it sort of took him out of this environment and this persona, and he sort of accidentally ended up going up a hill because somebody had said, oh, you must go and see this hill, or you must go and see this pond. And it was sort of things which you're thinking, oh, is this relevant? You know, but obviously he was suddenly saying, oh, I'm so glad I went up that hill and saw that view. I'm so glad I went up that pond. I'm so glad I stayed in that hotel. And it was all sort of a bit, you sort of wondered where it was going, because in between we had these flashbacks and reflections on what had been happening at Darlington Hall. Did you feel the way he structured that worked for you, Col?
Very much so, yeah. I think he's probably never had a holiday, or hadn't had a holiday in absolutely years. So he kind of, when someone was saying, to me anyway, when someone was saying, go and look at this pond, go and look at this view at the top of the hill, he would immediately go and do it. It was very much like a naive toddler when he first sees the sea, when he's at the seaside. Got to do this, got to do that. And also I felt as though he didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings by not taking up their suggestions.
Yeah, yeah.
But his snobbishness was unrelenting when he was in the pub, and he couldn't help bragging about the people he'd met and his involvement in foreign affairs, he said.
Yeah, that was an interesting scene, I felt, because he was kind of, he ran out of petrol and ended up in this pub, and the people in the pub thought he was a gentleman, and suddenly he was sort of lifted out of this servant role, senior servant albeit, and was being treated like somebody posh, and the doctor kind of saw through that a bit but didn't mind. And so during this road trip he's being sort of pulled out all the time, isn't he? Did you feel that, Anne?
Yes, into different and quite novel situations for him, that he's not, you know, he's struggling at one level to work out how to cope with them. And I think in a way also it prepares, to the extent it prepares him and the reader for when he finally meets Miss Kenton the part. I think if he just jumped and sort of driven and nothing had happened and then he'd met her, it wouldn't have worked quite as much, but it's had a run up to it.
Yes,
through these other meetings.
Yes. Yeah. How about you, Tahira? Did you find that, did it work for you, the idea of the road trip?
Yeah, I think that I felt that there was a sense of freedom to him, even in the way that he acted, in the way that he spoke, in the things that he did. And I felt that he appreciated people saying, go up the hill, go to this pond, go to this river, etc. It felt to me like that wasn't in that social aspect wasn't part of his being, his nature. So he needed that direction and he was happy to take that direction. But I did feel that journey was a sense of hope. There was something that he was hoping for. Well, we know what he possibly was hoping for and what he thought he was going to get out of it.
Yeah.
In a selfish kind of way, possibly the other person, Miss Kenton, probably wouldn't have wanted that, but he was going to get what he wanted out of it, and he was happy with that. So it's still on his terms, but that, to me, those two words, the freedom and the hope, are in that journey. And then meeting those people, you can see that kind of tug of war that he's having with himself, not being able to relate to these people, seeing how, and it shows how different he is in these social settings, and how limited his ability is to be able to converse with different people. So perhaps his stature has got run away with itself, and then he starts to saying X, Y, and it naturally comes out. But then if he hadn't said that, what would he have said? Because I don't feel that there's another, or he wants to show another side of this being. So that's why I think I describe him as being very military. When people are in the army, it's when they come out of that army setting, they need to navigate into being a day-to-day, what I term normal human being.
Yeah, that's interesting, that, to hear, because I don't get the selfishness. I don't think there is an ounce of selfishness in Stevens at all. Quite the opposite, in fact. I think he's been completely selfless, because going back to the ambition of being the perfect butler, he's been in love with, and this is the brilliance of the author, the reader, knows that he's been in love with Miss Kenton for years, and yet it's never been expressed between them, but the reader knows that this is going on. And I think if he was selfish, he would have expressed his feelings at some stage towards Miss Kenton, but he never does, and that's because he's got this burning ambition to do his best to serve.
I don't agree. I think from my perspective, I feel if the book continued, I feel that he would want her back in that house. Then he gets to be with her, see her, but then he never divulges his feelings.
But don't forget, this is a two-way thing, because Miss Kenton feels exactly the same way about Stevens.
But we do see elements that she tried.
And incidentally, the formality is such that we never actually know Stephen's Christian name.
No.
It's mentioned in the movie, but not in the book. And even when he's talking to his own father, face to face, he refers to him as father. He says, I hope father is feeling better now.
Yeah, that's weird.
Third person.
It's this brainwashing of formality that he was fighting against.
And he tells Miss Kenton off for calling him William, even though that would be the correct term for the housekeeper to use.
Yes.
Yeah. Good. So we've got onto this relationship now. So let's just have a chat about that. I mean, it's interesting that you're fairly confident that Miss Kenton has feelings for him, because it's a pretty sparky sort of relationship. You know, they're clashing a lot, aren't they? And they're falling out, and she's saying to him, well, don't come and see me in my room, and leave a message with, and then he says a similar thing, well, don't come and see me with a problem, leave a message for me. So, you know, there's a lot of sort of conflict and disagreement between them.
There is, but then they start meeting each other at night for their nightly cocoa, don't they? On the pretext that they need to have these discussions about what's going to happen in the following day. But I think they both realise it's because they like each other's company.
Yes. But that breaks down, of course, and then obviously she meets this other person and is sort of carried away. But do you feel that underlying all this conflict and misunderstanding, there is love? Do you?
Very, very definitely, very definitely. When they meet up, right towards the end of the book, Miss Kenton, or Mrs. Ben as she now is, points out that she left her husband quite a few times, but she's grown to love him in time. But then again, she often wonders what her life would be, and she wonders this out loud. Often wonders what her life would be if her and Stevenson had got together. So, yeah, I'm very confident that it's a two-way thing. Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Anne? Do you feel there's love underlying that?
Yes, I mean, just neither of them really expresses it, do they? But the reader gets it. That's why it's cleverly written, because
it is.
The reader definitely gets it, but they're not saying it to each other. Maybe sort of at the very end, she says a bit more, and then he says it to himself afterwards, but not before. Yeah. But you can read it into the exchanges and to what they actually do. Is, you know, you just went through about beating, and then, you know, that gets stopped. But he's there knowing it shouldn't really have stopped if they'd only speak out, but they're not going to.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. You're reading a book and you're saying, for God's sake, man, just tell her what you feel. And when they get to the end, when they meet each other after all these years, I'm thinking, oh, they're going to get together now. They'll get, but no.
No,
how about you, Tahera? Do you feel that there's love underlying?
Yeah, I do, because I think the first thing I think I've written here, the feeling towards Miss Kenton, didn't know what it was, but it stopped him in his tracks. So he didn't know how to connect to that emotion. There was something that made him feel, oh, I mean, that's a kind of, like, how I can say, a premature teenage kind of lovey crushy kind of thing that you get when you're a schoolgirl. That kind of funny feeling when you see someone. That's, although he's an older man, but that's that kind of, you know, that it's going towards that. There was something, but he just didn't know what it was. And I feel that something was that there was something different about this female as opposed to other females that he's watching. But you can tell all through the journey that these two take, how she's trying to catch his eye, trying to get to connect with him, his emotions. Would you be jealous? Have you not got nothing to say? And then I think, I don't know whether it was the film or the book, and she says, oh, you like pretty ladies, and I can see why you didn't want to employ that person who ran off with that second butler or something like that. So in every opportunity, she's trying to say, goodness me, are you, you know, what's your desires? What's your desires as a man? You trying to, you know, I'm trying to connect with you. I'm trying to catch you. I'm trying to do something. What do you have to say about that then? Sort of, say something, man.
early on in the book, he's quite what's the word? It's quite dismissive of staff who get together and run off together. And he says it's a common problem. And again, going back towards this ambition to be the perfect butler, I don't think he wants to fall into what he sees as that lack of professionalism.
Do you then think that there's an element of him saying that to warn her not to do that, and that has warned her to say, you know, I'm trying to say to you, this is not going to happen?
I think he's torn, and that to me is the greatness behind the book. I think he's torn from day to day, from year to year. I think he's got one half of him which wants to be the perfect machine almost, and the other half is genuinely loves Miss Kenton and needs to do something about it.
What do you think would have happened if they had sort of got off with each other, as it were? Would they have had to leave, or would they have been able to remain in post?
I wouldn't, because
I think Mr. Faraday was much more laid back than Lord Darlington.
Oh, yeah.
So
he would have loved it.
He would have allowed that, definitely. Yeah.
I think that more so Miss Kenton would have struggled, because I think that he would then continue to fight with himself to be that best butler. And then when he was in his work mode, he would be very cold towards her, and that would have a difficulty with Miss Kenton, because I feel that Miss Kenton had more emotion than what.
So
Mr.
you
Stevens
don't.
done.
So you don't think the closeness and intimacy that comes with a loving relationship would have changed Stevens in any way?
Partly, but I think he still would have tried to fight it off and try to be still quite rigid and as he was before. And that fight might have resonated into how he behaved with her on a daily basis, which probably would have affected Miss Kenton, because to go from being, it's a tough thing, if being close and then completely cold almost, to working like that, that's a tough pill to swallow. You know, I couldn't do it. You know,
I think
you're right.
I think in expressing his love for Miss Kenton, he would have given up on his ambition to be this perfect butler, just as he does at the end of the book when he says, you know, he's got to learn how to swap banter with Mr. Faraday and be a bit more relaxed.
But that was that. But when he became more free with Miss Kenton, that was when he was outside the box. He was outside that the manor. That was him outside being a butler, and he had more freedom to speak. But if he was still in that,
was he ever free? Was he ever free with Miss Kenton? I don't think he was he?
I think towards the end he softened. When he was out on his journey and he met up with her, I think he softened. Yeah.
Well, let's just talk about that ending then. You know, that the sort of resolution of it. Did you feel that was a good way to resolve it? Did it work for you? The fact that she just hopped on the bus and disappeared forever.
For me, yes, it did. Because life's like that. I mean, life's full of unfinished business.
Yeah. You know, I kind of wanted them to sort it out, but I kind of knew they wouldn't. And I think if they had, it would have been less satisfying, even though I would have liked it. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. How about you, Tahera? Did it work for you, that ending?
Not for me emotionally, but I think that was the only way it could have been. Was I surprised with the way Mrs. Kenton's life has ended? Probably not. But I don't think that she was head over heels with going off with this other person. I think at the beginning, it was like, well, Mr. Stevens not going to give me attention. I'll get it from somewhere else. And possibly that might trigger him to make some kind of move on me. And then that didn't work. And then she came back and she says, what do you have to say? When she accepted the proposal, what do you have to say about that then? And he kept going, congratulations. He had nothing to say.
I think at the end, what we had was a broken-hearted old man sitting alone, looking back on his years, realizing he's basically wasted his life. And that's always going to be a hugely dramatic scene. And I just thought the author handled that with real empathy and a light touch. I thought it was a beautiful ending.
The bit that really hurt me, though, was the bit where, you know, you've got the Jewish maids, and then the Lord Darlington sacked the maids because they were Jewish, and Miss Kenton didn't agree, and then she sort of said, you know, I assure you, you know, Mr. Stevens, I shall leave this post if they go, and she couldn't fulfill that. She couldn't fulfill that, and she showed a kind of vulnerability to Mr. Stevens by saying that, you know, I think something like, I disgraced myself. I haven't been able to fulfill what I said. And she opened up to him. And I think further along, he sort of mentioned that he wasn't happy, or he didn't agree with what Lord Darlington had done at that time. And she expressed that, had you shown me that emotion at that time, it would have helped me some way to accept it a bit better. And she got frustrated that, again, here you had the opportunity to say that I agree with you, but we can't help it. When he couldn't even he couldn't even say that.
He couldn't do it, though, because it would interfere with his ambition to be the perfect butler. You got to follow unquestioningly the orders of your employer.
So that, to me, was, for me, her rationalizing his character. At no point in any given situation can I get this man to express himself.
This man that I love.
Yeah, to express himself in any downfall. So to me, that's her analyzing. At what point is he going to just show me some kind of emotion? No point. No point.
Yeah. No. I think that's what drives the book for me.
And I think that it's that constant battle that because it's you know, it's very sort of like she's trying to differentiate, is he a human or is he this robot? You know, this complete monetized robot that just regurgitates everything without any feeling. And she's battling, he's having his own battles. And then these emotions come, but she can't connect with him, even though she's desperately seeking.
I think that there's a couple of moments of real humor put in the book just to kind of just as a kind of light relief of all this tension, which I really enjoyed. When Stevens tells us that continentals and Celts are unable to be butlers because as a breed they are incapable of the emotional restraint required, which only the English race is capable of. That was a laugh out loud moment for me. And then when Lord Darlington says, we Englishmen have to be seen by the world to be arm in arm with Frenchmen for the good of the war. And Lord Darlington then had one wishes for a good bath at the mere reminder. And of course, there was the tiger under the table, wasn't there?
Oh, yes.
In India, yeah.
Mentioning the war, then, obviously we've got this elephant in the story of appeasement, which is a sort of slow burn through the whole story, but I think is a very important part of the plot. Tahera's mentioned the Jewish workers who were sacked by Lord Darlington. So do you think Lord Darlington was a Nazi sympathizer, or was he genuinely just trying to find a way to stop World War II happening? Because, you know, this is a very important theme of the novel, and it's sort of smouldering away in the background. Col, what do you think about Lord Darlington?
I think he was both. I think he genuinely wanted to make sure that the war would not take place, but in doing so, he was hoodwinked. I don't think he was a very bright person. For all his money and all his influence, I don't think he was very intelligent, because in his completely innocent, I think, attempts to stop the war, he actually ended up talking to lots of Nazis who used him for their own ends, and they would speak to him and try to keep Britain's involvement in Nazi activities at bay. So I think he was both. And Tahera, you mentioned the two Jewish maids. I think the length of Lord Darlington's stupidity and how gullible he was is shown in that someone told him that you shouldn't really employ Jewish people, and for that reason he got rid of them. But then he realized through whatever method that was wrong, because he asked Stevens if he could get in touch with these maids and give them some kind of reparation financially. So I think that was thrown in as a device to show just how impressionable and how gullible that Lord Darlington was.
Good point. Yeah. What about you, Anne?
Yeah, I think gullible's a very good description of him. I mean, he's quite an annoying character, really, I feel, just generally. But it's interesting, isn't it, that I think it's quite near the beginning when Stevens is starting to reflect, and it's blended with what's happening now, just before his journey, or it might be just when he started. He doesn't want to. He covers up the fact that he's ever worked for Lord Darlington.
Yeah. Which
is quite interesting. I think that's quite early in the book.
Yeah, there's a bit of a cloud hanging over Darlington Hall, I think, because of these conferences that took place. And somebody mentions it, doesn't they? Don't they? I think what wasn't there a problem with Darlington Hall, and he sort of glosses over it, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. Self-preservation kicking in there.
What did you feel about that theme of the World War II and the appeasement to here?
Yeah, I didn't know whether Lord Darlington was knowledgeable or whether he was a people pleaser, and I think it was kind of, for me, both. But I mean, there's a bit where I think where he sits down that round table, that famous meeting that he has, and I think one of the Americans, or one of the events that he has, one of the Americans thanks him for being the host, but insults him at the same time, and said that this is why you English can't don't do well in politics or something like that, because you have all these titles and money, but you almost like saying you don't have anything in between the ears. And it actually reminds me a lot of the Conservative government now, as well as previous, but it does feel like, to me, very, very conservative. But the bit about which I found really sort of heartbreaking and so unnecessary, but very, very much as the time, and it probably still goes on today, was when Lord Darlington was in the smoking room with this group of these other people, and he was asking him questions about politics. He was asking Mr. Stevens about politics, and then he says, "I have no answer. I'm not well versed about things in this matter." And it was almost like he was a parrot. And then he said the same again. And whether he has an opinion, which shows his character, he's not there to give the opinion. It just said to them, "This is why you cannot give a vote to the common people, because the common people have no understanding how politics works. And that's why it's all, this democracy. We cannot have democracy in this shape or form." But again, it just reminds me of the Conservative government, and we've got all these lords sitting which are very aged, etc., and they have a title, but probably don't do very much. But
I think that scene showed that the butler was actually more astute than these landed gentry, because you don't talk about sex, politics, and religion to your employer in that kind of setting. Yeah. I'm sure Stevens did have a political view.
Yeah.
Because they did share a joke with the doctor in the pub about the guy who was a socialist who was ranting and raving. That. And they were laughing about socialism there. Yeah. So I think Stevens did have a political view. He was just far too canny to voice it in that circumstance.
Yeah, but I mean, they proved their fun. But I thought that was really, really cruel. But it was definitely set in the time that it was meant to. But I do. Was it? I mean, the American who bought the Mr. Faraday who bought the property. I think he was the person who actually insulted Mr. Lord Darlington at the table.
Yes, he called him amateur, didn't he?
Yeah.
You'd leave it to the professionals.
Yeah, and I think that is probably the difference between maybe possibly American and English times in them days, or something like that.
But Faraday was proved right, wasn't he?
Absolutely.
Yeah, he was.
Because Lord Darlington was having a lot of these meetings without the knowledge of the government. Everything was a little bit hush-hush.
Yeah. Good. Okay, well, we're out of time, really. So we'll just, I think I know what these scores are going to be, but let's all just give it a score out of 5. Carl?
I'd give it a 6 if I could. It's a beautiful book. It's a really lovely novel. Yeah, fantastic.
And obviously, you'd recommend it to a friend. How about you, Anne?
Yeah, I'd give it 5 too. Yes, I'd recommend it.
Yeah, and Tahera?
5. It just brought up so much previous emotions. I love that kind of that sort of beautiful, pure love story, even though it didn't go nowhere and I wanted to bash his ears. But, he needed a bit shaking up.
What about you, Ian? What are you
I'm
giving?
giving it 5 definitely. I thought it was beautifully controlled, and regulated and modulated and finely balanced. You know, as Col said, it was sort of perfect novel, really. So that's good. We've all liked that. So just to tell everyone that the book for February is To Paradise by Hanya Yanahara. If I pronounce that wrong, I apologize. And that's available now on BorrowBox. So thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you next month.
Yeah.
See you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.